The moment the judge looked up, his face turned pale. He whispered just 2 words that silenced the entire courtroom. "It's her." None of them knew who I truly was, until that day. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep sharing stories like this one, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. We love knowing how far our stories travel and who's joining us from around the world. When I stepped into the courtroom that morning, something strange happened. The sound of footsteps, the murmur of voices, the shuffle of papers, all of it seemed to fade as if time itself had paused. My daughter, Clara, sitting 2 rows ahead, turned to her husband and whispered something I couldn't hear, but I saw the smirk on her lips. She believed this would be the day she finally erased me from her life for good, but she was wrong. As I took my seat, the judge lifted his head, and for a split second, his face went pale. The pen slipped from his hand and rolled across the desk, echoing louder than it should have. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "It's her." The entire courtroom fell into silence. I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me, some curious, some judgmental, others confused. No one, not even my own daughter, knew what was about to unfold. They thought they were here to prove that I was incompetent, too old to manage my affairs, too fragile to make decisions. What they didn't know was that I had already uncovered the truth, the kind of truth that doesn't just shift power, but completely shatters illusions. The truth that makes the arrogant tremble and the deceitful pray to be unseen. In that moment, I wasn't just a 6-8-year-old widow accused of losing her mind. I was something they hadn't expected, a woman who had finally remembered who she was. I remember the way Clara avoided looking at me. Her husband, Brian, sat beside her, confident, his hand resting on a stack of legal papers he thought would bury me. The sight of them together used to break me. Now it only reminded me how blindness comes in many forms. Sometimes it's love, sometimes it's fear, and sometimes it's the habit of forgiveness that's been stretched too far. The clerk called my name. Mrs. Margaret Hale. For a moment, the sound didn't even feel like mine. That name had belonged to someone gentle, trusting, a woman who once spent her mornings making coffee for a daughter who no longer visited. But that woman was gone. What stood in her place now was someone who had walked through fire and come out carrying proof that kindness is not weakness. I stood, my knees trembling slightly, not from fear but from the weight of everything that had led me here, the late nights, the betrayals, the tears no one saw. The same courtroom where they hoped to take away my dignity was about to become the place where I reclaimed it. The judge's eyes softened as he spoke. "Please proceed," he said quietly, but I saw the recognition in his gaze. I saw memory flicker, the kind of recognition that changes the entire story before it even begins. What no one in that room understood, not yet, was that I had already won the moment I decided to stop being afraid. You see, fear is a cage, but dignity, once awakened, is a storm. If you had told me a year ago that I would be standing in a courtroom facing my own daughter, I would have laughed and said you were crazy. I was never the type to fight back. My battles were quiet, fought in kitchens and grocery aisles, in letters never sent, in prayers whispered under my breath. But life has a way of pushing even the gentlest souls to the edge, and when it does, something remarkable happens. The same hands that once trembled pouring coffee learn to steady themselves, holding truth like a weapon. That morning, as the clouds outside dimmed the sunlight, I felt an unexplainable calm wash over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about how much I had lost. I was thinking about what I still had the will to stand, the proof of who I really was, and the strength to finally make them listen. People talk about justice as if it's a word written in laws or carved into marble, but justice to me was something simpler. It was the quiet moment when someone who had been dismissed, belittled, and betrayed finally stands and says, "Enough." And that's what this story is about. Not just the lies and the greed that nearly destroyed me, but the moment I realized that survival isn't enough. You have to reclaim your story before someone else writes it for you. By the time this hearing was over, Clara and Brian would learn the truth about everything they had tried to take from me and about what I had found hidden in the life they thought they could control. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because before that courtroom silence broke, before the verdict, there was a journey, a painful, humbling, yet beautiful journey that began the day I learned what betrayal truly feels like. If you're watching this right now, please subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us keep sharing these real, emotional stories, stories of betrayal, strength, and second chances. Every subscription, every comment, gives this channel the courage to keep telling stories that remind us that dignity has no expiration date. Now, before we move on, I want to ask you something simple but meaningful. Imagine you're in my place that morning. You've been betrayed by someone you love, someone you raised, someone you trusted with your heart. Would you? A. Forgive them quietly and walk away to start over somewhere new? B. Stand your ground and fight back for your dignity, even if it means losing them forever? Tell me in the comments, A or B. I'd love to know which path you believe leads to true peace. I used to believe peace was something you could build with small habits, quiet mornings, a warm cup of coffee, the scent of blooming azaleas outside the window. For years, that routine was my anchor. Every morning at 6, I would wake before the neighborhood stirred, grind my own beans, and pour steaming coffee into a chipped porcelain mug that had outlived almost everything I once held dear. I'd open the curtains, let the faint sunlight spill across the kitchen tiles, and whisper a soft good morning to the framed photo of my late husband, Richard. He'd been gone for nearly a decade, but in that stillness, I could almost hear his laugh. Life had become predictable, almost tender in its loneliness. I tended my garden, fed the birds, and spoke to Richard as though he were still around to answer. People might have called me old-fashioned, but those rituals were what kept me connected to who I used to be: a wife, a mother, a woman who believed kindness was enough to hold a family together. My daughter, Clara, was the reason behind everything I'd ever done. I had raised her alone after Richard's illness consumed our savings and our nights. I worked as a cleaner in an office building downtown, polishing other people's desks, while dreaming of the life she would one day have. I took in sewing jobs in the evenings, and on weekends, I baked pastries for the local cafe. Every dollar I earned had Clara's name written on it in invisible ink: tuition, rent, books, future. When she graduated from college, I sat in the last row of the auditorium with tears in my eyes, clapping so hard my hands hurt. That was the happiest I had been since Richard died. When Clara met Brian, I told myself this was her time to be loved, to rest in the safety I had worked so hard to give her. I welcomed him into our family without hesitation, pretending not to notice how his handshake was too firm, how his compliments often carried an edge. Richard had always told me, "Don't judge people too quickly, Margaret. Sometimes pride hides fear." So I ignored the unease that whispered in my gut. I wanted to believe my daughter's laughter when she spoke of him. I wanted to believe that, at last, she had found someone who would cherish her the way her father cherished me. Sundays became sacred. They would come for lunch, Clara in soft summer dresses, Brian in his crisp shirts, and for those few hours, the house would fill with life again. I would set the table with my embroidered linen, bring out the good china, and roast chicken the way Richard liked it, even though I was the only one who remembered. I lived for those days. Sometimes, after they left, I would sit by the window and whisper, "See, Richard? She's happy." But slowly the laughter began to fade. Clara's visits grew shorter, her excuses longer. "Work's been busy," she would say, or "Brian's tired." I told myself it was normal. Life changes, children grow. But what I couldn't ignore was the tone, distant, polite, a careful wall between us. When she did call, it was often about practical things: insurance papers, taxes, favors. She spoke to me like one might speak to a fragile neighbor, not a mother. Still, I tried to keep the connection alive. I sent her jars of jam I'd made, knitted tiny baby booties, even though she wasn't pregnant yet, just for when the time comes, I'd say with a smile. She never mentioned them again. The next time I visited their apartment, I saw one of the jars unopened, collecting dust on a shelf. There are moments in life when something inside you senses a shift long before your mind admits it. One night, I sat in the kitchen and realized how long it had been since Clara had said, "I love you." The silence of that realization filled the house like smoke. I looked around at the photos on the walls. Clara as a little girl, Clara in her prom dress, Clara at her wedding, and I wondered when I had become a background figure in my own story. But I refused to let bitterness take root. I told myself that love is cyclical, that even distance is sometimes part of it. I kept her room just as it was, dusted the framed drawings she had made when she was 8, and left the lamp on some nights, foolishly imagining she might walk in and say she was staying over. The truth is, I didn't mind being alone. What hurt was the feeling that I had somehow failed her. I replayed the years in my mind, wondering where I had gone wrong. Had I given too much? Had I made her feel smothered? Or worse, had I made her believe that love was something that could always wait until later? In my small town, people like me fade quietly. You become the kind woman who bakes cookies for the neighbor's children, the one they call Mrs. Hale, even though you wish they'd still call you Margaret. You become invisible not because you are old, but because your usefulness has expired in the eyes of those who once needed you. Yet every morning, I still brewed my coffee, still whispered to Richard's photo, still believed that life, in its quiet way, would give me something kind again. I didn't know that kindness was about to come disguised as betrayal. I didn't know that the people I loved most would be the ones to test every ounce of my strength. That morning ritual, the coffee, the azaleas, the silence, it was all about to change. The world I had built, the gentle rhythm I thought would carry me to the end of my days, was standing on the edge of collapse. I could feel it, like thunder before rain, but I couldn't yet see the storm. I had no idea that in just a few weeks, I would discover the truth about who I really was, what Richard had left behind, and how even the quietest woman can rise when the world tries to bury her. But for now, in that brief and tender calm before everything broke, I still believed that love, no matter how distant, would find its way back home. It happened on a Thursday, one of those quiet afternoons when the sky looked tired and the air carried the faint chill of approaching autumn. I had spent the morning preparing Clara's favorite dish, beef stew with carrots and soft dumplings, the same recipe she used to ask for every birthday. I laid out my embroidered tablecloth, the one I'd made when she was in high school, tiny flowers stitched with patient hands during long nights when Richard was sick. I even bought a bouquet of fresh lilies for the table. I wanted everything to feel warm, familiar, safe. I didn't know I was setting the stage for my own heartbreak. When I heard their car pull into the driveway, I felt a flicker of happiness, almost like relief. I hadn't seen them properly in weeks. I smoothed my apron, took a deep breath, and opened the door. But the warmth I expected never came. Brian walked in first, his expression blank, his posture claiming the space as if he owned it. Without so much as a greeting, he collapsed into Richard's old armchair, turned on the television, and started scrolling through his phone. Clara followed behind, her eyes downcast, wearing a green dress I'd bought her last Christmas. She didn't smile. She didn't even look at the flowers. "Mom," she said softly, but there was a tone in her voice I didn't recognize, detached, rehearsed, like someone reading a line from a script. She sat on the edge of the chair, her hands folded too tightly. "We need to talk." The words froze me. That phrase, "we need to talk," never meant anything good. I turned off the stove and sat across from her, wiping my damp hands on a towel. "Brian and I have been thinking," she continued, not meeting my eyes. "This house is too big for you, Mom. You shouldn't be here all alone. It's not safe. It's too much for you to handle." Her voice was calm, almost professional, but underneath it, I heard something colder. This wasn't concern. It was convenience. I tried to smile. "I'm doing fine, sweetheart. I like my routines. The house keeps me busy." She glanced at Brian as if asking permission to continue. He nodded slightly, a subtle cue that made my stomach turn. "We've already found a wonderful place," she said, forcing a smile. "It's called Maple Grove. It's a beautiful community just for people your age. They have gardens, activities, nurses on staff 24 hours a day. You'd love it." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. "You've found a place? For me?" "Yes," she replied quickly, as if hurrying through a difficult sentence. "You'd have your own room. It's clean, safe. You'll make friends. You won't have to worry about anything." I looked around the room, at the family photos lining the walls. Clara's graduation, our first Christmas without Richard, her wedding day. Every picture told a story, a memory that lived inside these walls. "But Clara, this is our home," I said, my voice trembling. "Your father built this with his hands. Every corner holds a piece of us." "Memories live in the heart, Mom," she interrupted sharply. "Not in a house." Something inside me cracked then. She was looking at me, but her eyes were cold, distant, as if she were talking to a stranger. Brian leaned back in the chair, crossing his legs. "It's really for the best, Mrs. Hale," he said, his tone polite but hollow. "You'll be more comfortable there. We'll handle all the details." I wanted to scream, but all I could do was whisper, "This isn't comfort, this is exile." Brian shrugged. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. It's already decided." I could feel my pulse pounding in my throat. Decided? Without asking me? Clara stood abruptly, as if afraid I'd argue more. "They're coming to appraise the house next week. We'll take care of the paperwork. You don't need to worry about a thing." They left after that, no dinner, no hug, not even a glance back at the table I'd spent all morning setting. The stew went cold on the stove, the lilies drooped in their vase, and I sat staring at the empty chairs where they had once laughed and shared stories. That night, sleep refused to come. I wandered through the house barefoot, each creaking floorboard sounding like a farewell. In the hallway, I stopped before the photos again, Clara at 5, missing her front tooth, Clara at 16, holding her first trophy, Clara on her wedding day, radiant and hopeful. I touched the glass of each frame, tracing her face with my fingertips. "Where did I lose you?" I whispered. In the following days, the silence was replaced by intrusion. Brian returned with a real estate appraiser, a man in a gray suit who walked through my home with a clipboard, noting details as if it were a property, not a life. "These kitchen tiles are dated," he muttered. "The plumbing will need an upgrade." Clara followed behind him, nodding mechanically at his every remark. She didn't look at me. She didn't see me. I wanted to ask her if she remembered the day Richard and I laid those tiles together, how we laughed when one cracked, how she brought us lemonade and said, "When I grow up, I'll live here forever." But I knew it would only echo in the emptiness between us. When they left, I sat alone at the kitchen table and realized that love, when unreturned, can feel like a kind of death, the kind where the body still breathes, but the heart has stopped trusting. I stayed awake until dawn, watching the sky shift from gray to gold. I told myself I would find the strength to endure whatever came next. But deep down, I knew something irreversible had happened. The daughter I had spent my life protecting had become someone else, someone colder, unreachable, as if she had built a wall made of polished words and empty promises. And somewhere inside that wall, the echo of my own kindness was trapped, unseen, unheard. That was the day I began to understand that betrayal doesn't always announce itself with shouting or violence. Sometimes it comes dressed as concern, spoken softly, with a smile. The days that followed felt like a long, slow unraveling of everything I had built. At first, I tried to convince myself that Clara and Brian had spoken out of concern, that their words had come from love, not greed. But denial can only hold a heart together for so long. Every morning I woke with a heaviness in my chest, a quiet dread that seemed to settle deeper with each passing day. And then, one afternoon, I understood why. I had been sitting in the living room, mending the hem of a curtain, when the doorbell rang. It was Brian, unannounced as always, with a man in a gray suit carrying a folder and a measuring tape. "This is Mr. Lawson," Brian said casually, stepping past me before I could ask anything. "He's just here to take a quick look around." Mr. Lawson didn't greet me. He went straight to work, walking through my home as though it belonged to him. He measured walls, opened doors, jotted notes on a clipboard. "The foundation looks solid, but these fixtures are outdated," he muttered, inspecting the light switch. "Kitchen will need a full remodel." I followed them from room to room, feeling smaller with every step. My home, the place where I had celebrated birthdays, cried over bills, cooked for family, was being dissected like a specimen. "What's going on here?" I finally asked, my voice trembling but firm. Brian didn't look at me when he replied. "Just an appraisal. We want to get an idea of what the house is worth before we start the paperwork." "Paperwork?" I repeated. "I never agreed to sell this house." Clara appeared behind him, clutching her purse. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. You know it's time." Her tone carried that infuriating softness people use when they've already made up their minds, the kind that sounds like care but feels like dismissal. I looked at her and saw not the little girl who once danced barefoot through the garden, but a stranger repeating someone else's words. When they left, I stayed in the doorway long after the car disappeared down the street. The silence of the house pressed against my chest until it felt hard to breathe. I walked to the kitchen and rested my hand on the counter Richard had built, the one he smoothed and sanded himself, grain by grain. "They think this is just a house," I whispered, tracing the scratches left by years of use. "But it's our story." The next day, Clara arrived again, this time with a stack of brochures. She spread them out on the table like a dealer laying down cards. "Look, Mom," she said, her voice artificially bright. "Maple Grove has walking trails, a library, and they host bingo nights on Tuesdays. Doesn't that sound nice?" I picked up one of the pamphlets. It showed smiling seniors holding hands under a sunset that looked too perfect to be real. I didn't need to read the fine print to know what it meant. They wanted to send me away, out of sight and out of mind. "I don't need bingo nights," I said quietly. "I need my home." Clara sighed, as if exhausted by my stubbornness. "We just want what's best for you. You can't live alone forever." The words stung, because they weren't entirely false. I was aging, slower, more forgetful at times. But independence is not measured in speed or memory. It's measured in dignity. "I've lived here for 30 years, I told her. "I know every creak in these floors, every sound this house makes at night. I'm not leaving." That night, I locked every door, not out of fear of strangers, but of family. It is a peculiar kind of terror, the moment you realize the people you trust most might not have your best interests at heart. A few mornings later, there was another knock. When I opened the door, 3 people stood there: Brian, Clara, and a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. He introduced himself as Mr. Conway, their lawyer. "Mrs. Hale," he began smoothly, "I'm here to finalize the property transfer. We've prepared all the documents. It will be very straightforward. We just need your signature." "Transfer?" I asked. "I thought you were selling the house." Clara wouldn't meet my eyes. "We decided to keep it in the family," she murmured. The words landed like a physical blow. It wasn't just about moving me out anymore. They wanted to take ownership, to remove me completely from the home Richard and I had built from nothing. "I'm not signing anything," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Brian's expression changed instantly. The polite mask slipped, revealing something colder underneath. "Ma'am," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "you're not in a condition to make decisions like this. Dawn," he corrected himself quickly. "Clara is your only heir. She's acting in your best interest." "My best interest?" I whispered. "By stealing my house?" He stepped closer, his size meant to intimidate. "You've been forgetting things, leaving the stove on, losing track of dates. It's dangerous for you to live alone. We've already talked to a doctor." It was a lie. I knew it, and so did Clara, but she said nothing. Her silence was worse than his words. "Mom," she said softly, "please don't fight this. We're just trying to help." Help. The word made me want to laugh. How easily cruelty hides behind that mask. I stood straighter, meeting Brian's stare. "This is my house," I said, surprising even myself with the strength in my voice, "and I am not leaving." The lawyer exchanged glances with them. "If you refuse to sign voluntarily," he said, "we may have to pursue other legal options. A mental incompetency proceeding, for instance." For a moment, the room spun. The world I knew, the one filled with coffee and azaleas, and the memory of Richard's laughter collapsed under the weight of betrayal. They were willing to declare me incapable, just to take what wasn't theirs. I felt my voice shake. "I need time," I murmured. "You have 1 week," Brian said flatly. "After that, we'll do what we have to do." When they left, the house fell into silence again, but this time, it didn't feel like peace. It felt like the calm before a storm. I sank into Richard's old chair and finally let the tears come. Not just for the home I might lose, but for the daughter I already had. For the first time in my life, I felt small, powerless, and truly alone. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the grief and the fear, something else began to stir, a flicker of defiance, a quiet whisper of the woman I used to be. I didn't yet know how, but I promised myself one thing that night: they would not take everything from me, not without a fight. In the days that followed, my house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a stage where strangers performed a cruel play in which I was only a prop. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the echo of voices that didn't belong to love. Every knock on the door carried the same dread. I never knew whether it would be another appraiser, another letter, or another attempt to chip away at what was left of my dignity. One morning, I was sitting at the table, sipping coffee gone cold, when I saw Brian's car pull into the driveway. My stomach turned. He wasn't alone. A man in a dark suit stepped out beside him, carrying a leather briefcase. Clara followed, her eyes fixed on the ground as if she couldn't bear to meet mine. I didn't move when they entered. I only listened to the steady click of their shoes across the hardwood floor that Richard had laid down decades ago. "Mrs. Hale," the man began, extending a hand I didn't take. "My name is Mr. Conway. I'm the attorney assisting your daughter and son-in-law with the transition of this property." "The transition?" I asked quietly. "Is that what you call throwing someone out of their own home?" He offered a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's all for your comfort. We just need your signature to finalize the transfer. Everything is prepared." I turned to Clara. "Transfer? You told me you were selling the house." Her lips trembled before she spoke. "Brian and I decided to keep it in the family. It'll make things simpler in the long run." "Simpler for whom?" I wanted to ask, but my voice was locked somewhere between heartbreak and fury. Brian leaned against the doorframe with his usual arrogance. "Let's not make this complicated, Margaret. You'll have your own space at Maple Grove, and we'll handle everything here. You won't have to worry about a thing." That sentence, "you won't have to worry about a thing," was the cruelest of all. It was the same phrase Richard used to say when I was overwhelmed, but when he said it, it was a promise. When Brian said it, it was a warning. "I'm not signing anything," I said. He straightened. The polite mask cracked. "Ma'am, you're not in a state to make decisions. You've been forgetting things." "That's not true," I interrupted. "Last week you left the stove on," he continued, eyes gleaming with triumph. I stared at him in disbelief. "That's a lie." "Brian," Clara whispered, "please." But he ignored her. "We've already consulted a doctor. If necessary, we can open an incompetency case." It felt as if the ground had vanished beneath me. My own daughter stood silently as her husband threatened to declare me mentally unfit. For a moment, all the years of sacrifice flashed before me. The nights I stayed awake sewing her school costumes, the food I skipped so she could have shoes that fit, the endless faith that love would be enough. "I need time," I managed to say, clutching the edge of the table. "You have a week," Brian replied, his tone cold and businesslike. "After that, we'll proceed legally." When they left, I didn't move. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. Each second felt like a countdown to something inevitable. I wanted to scream, but no one was there to hear me. Instead, I sat in Richard's old armchair, the one Brian had claimed as his own, and let the tears finally come. I wept for the home that was slipping through my fingers, for the daughter who no longer saw me as her mother, and for the life that had somehow narrowed into this one unbearable moment. The room around me felt smaller, as if the walls themselves were ashamed of witnessing such cruelty. At some point, exhaustion pulled me under, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. I dreamt of Richard standing by the garden, soil on his hands, smiling at me the way he used to when he finished a project. "Don't let them take it from you, Margaret," he said softly. "You know more than they think." When I woke, the dream clung to me like a whisper. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in the same chair, staring at the faded wallpaper. Something inside me had changed overnight. It wasn't strength exactly, not yet, but a spark of clarity. For years I had allowed others to decide what I was capable of. Richard had once called it my greatest kindness, and my greatest flaw, the way I believed the best in everyone, even when they didn't deserve it. But that morning, kindness no longer felt safe. It felt like a weapon turned inward. As sunlight crept through the curtains, I began to look around the house more deliberately. The desk Richard had used, the drawers I hadn't opened since he died, the locked cabinet in the study, suddenly they all seemed to hold secrets I had overlooked. Maybe, I thought, the answers I needed were already here, hidden in the life I had built with him. Maybe Richard had seen what was coming. The idea grew in my mind slowly, like a vine wrapping around grief. I didn't know yet what I was looking for, but I knew this: I would find it. And when I did, I would no longer be the helpless woman they believed me to be. That night, I stayed awake long after midnight, the house dark and still. I lit a small lamp and began sorting through drawers, searching for something, anything that could remind me I still had control over my life. I didn't know it then, but what I would uncover in that search would change everything. The papers, the folder, the truth Richard had left behind, it was all waiting for me, quietly, patiently, as if it had been there all along, just waiting for me to remember who I really was. Monday arrived gray and cold, the kind of morning that carried the heaviness of unfinished storms. I had spent the entire weekend awake, surrounded by papers I had found in Richard's old desk, the will, the property deeds, the bank statements that proved everything I thought I'd lost was still mine. The discovery had filled me with disbelief first, then quiet fury, and finally a strength I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just money that Richard had left me, it was armor. When the sound of tires crunching on gravel reached the window, I didn't move. I sat in my favorite chair by the window, tea in hand, the documents folded neatly in a brown envelope beside me. Through the lace curtains, I saw Brian step out of his car, his usual arrogance evident even in the way he adjusted his tie. Two men followed movers, judging by their uniforms, and behind them, Clara, her hands wrapped around her phone like it was a lifeline. They didn't knock. They walked straight in, as if the house no longer belonged to me. Brian looked around, nodding with satisfaction. "All right, let's make this quick," he told the movers. "Start with the living room furniture." "Don't bother," I said calmly, not raising my voice. The men froze mid-step. Brian turned toward me with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Hale," he said, as though addressing a stubborn child, "we talked about this. You've had a week. The truck's here. Let's not make a scene." I took a slow sip of my tea and set it down carefully. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. Clara stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. "Mom, please, don't start this again. The movers are already paid. We just want you settled somewhere comfortable." "Comfortable?" I repeated softly. "Is that what you call taking someone's life apart piece by piece?" Brian sighed dramatically. "You're being unreasonable. You've had your chance to cooperate, but since you refuse, we'll proceed with the transfer and—" I interrupted him before he could finish. "You should stop there, Brian. You're talking about a house that doesn't belong to you." He blinked. "Excuse me?" I rose slowly from the chair, every movement deliberate, controlled. "I said this house and much more does not belong to you, or Clara, or anyone but me." Brian's smirk faltered. "What are you talking about?" "I spent the weekend looking through Richard's old papers," I said, walking to the table. I picked up the brown envelope and placed it on the polished wood between us. "It turns out my late husband was far more intelligent than either of you realized. He left everything this house, the apartments you live in, the company shares to me. Not to us, to me." Clara's face drained of color. "That's impossible," she whispered. Brian laughed nervously, but there was no humor in it. "You're mistaken. You must have misunderstood something. Those documents can't be real." "Then by all means, verify them," I said. I unfolded the top paper, a deed of ownership for the apartment complex where they lived. "You've been paying rent for 3 years, haven't you? To a management company?" He frowned. "Of course. Why?" "Because that company deposits the payments directly into my account," I said. "I own the building, Brian." The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. Brian's mouth opened, but no words came. Clara looked from me to him, confusion twisting into fear. "You can't mean—" "Oh, but I do," I said, my voice steady now, the tremor of fear replaced with calm resolve. And it doesn't stop there. Richard also left me controlling shares in your company, Brian. He must have sensed what kind of man you were. He took a step toward me, anger rising in his face. You can't prove that! Would you like to see the paperwork? I asked, holding up another document. It's all right here, signed, notarized, and perfectly legal. Clara sank into the nearest chair. Why didn't you tell us? She whispered. Because I didn't know until a few days ago, I said softly. Your father kept it hidden to protect me, to protect us. Brian paced the room, muttering curses under his breath, his arrogance dissolving into something raw fear. This doesn't change anything, he said finally. You can't just evict us. We're family. Family? I repeated. Like when you tried to declare me mentally incompetent? Like when you packed my things without asking? Like when you stole my jewelry and called it helping? He didn't answer. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Mom, please, she said, her voice breaking. We made mistakes. We just thought. You thought I was powerless, I said quietly. But you were wrong. I could feel the years of silence, the weight of every sacrifice I had made, gathering behind my words. This house isn't just wood and bricks. It's 30 years of love, of memory, of work, and you both of you treated it like a prize to be claimed. Brian's face hardened again. You're making a huge mistake, Margaret. If you push us out, we'll fight you in court. Go ahead, I said, but before you do, you might want to think about where you'll live next month, because as of now, I'm ending your lease at the building you call home, legally. Clara gasped. You can't. I can, I said gently, and I will. The law is on my side this time. The movers stood awkwardly by the door, unsure what to do. You can leave, I told them. There's nothing to move here today. They hesitated only a moment before obeying, grateful to escape the tension. When the door closed, the silence that filled the room was different this time, not heavy but powerful. It was the sound of truth finally being spoken aloud. Brian glared at me with something close to hatred. This isn't over, he spat. No, I said. It's not, but the part where you control me is. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him so hard that the frame shook. Clara remained seated, her tears falling silently onto her hands. I looked at her, my heart aching despite everything. You should go too, I said softly. We'll talk when you're ready to see me as your mother again, not your burden. When she finally left, the quiet returned, but it no longer felt empty. I stood there for a long time, surrounded by the proof of what Richard had built and what I had finally found the courage to claim my life again. The woman they tried to silence was gone, and in her place stood someone new, not angry, not vengeful, but awake. The storm that followed was not the kind that comes from thunder or rain, but from human voices raised, trembling, desperate. After the truth came out, the walls of the house seemed to vibrate with all the things we had never said. I had spent decades being careful, soft-spoken, the one who swallowed her pain for the sake of peace. But peace built on silence isn't real, it's just fear with good manners. Brian was the first to break. He paced the room like a trapped animal, his face red, his jaw clenched. You can't just throw us out, he shouted. We're family. His voice cracked on the last word, but there was no love in it, only entitlement. You'd really evict your own daughter? Your grandchild? Clara flinched at the mention of the baby. I hadn't even known until that moment that she was pregnant. The news hit me like lightning, joy and sorrow colliding inside my chest. My first grandchild, a life that could have brought light into all this darkness, and yet it was being used as leverage in a cruel game. You didn't tell me, I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. Clara looked away, tears already forming. I was going to, she murmured, but everything got so complicated, I didn't know how. Brian stepped closer, his tone shifting from rage to false reason. There's no reason for this to get ugly, he said. You've got money, don't you? Help us out, and we can forget this ever happened. Forget? As if forgetting were something you could do with a signature and a handshake, as if betrayal could be erased like numbers from a checkbook. I looked at him then, not as my son-in-law, but as a stranger who had trespassed too far into my life. This isn't about money, I said. It's about respect. and you've both forgotten what that means." Clara broke down. "Mom, please. I made a mistake. I let him convince me you couldn't take care of yourself. He said it was for your safety. I swear, I didn't mean to hurt you." For the first time in years, I saw fear in her eyes, the kind of fear that comes when the truth strips away all excuses. I wanted to hold her, to tell her I understood, but something inside me stopped. Love does not mean letting people keep breaking you. Love, when it's pure, has boundaries. Brian turned toward her, furious. "Don't you dare put this on me," he snapped. "You were part of it from the start. You wanted this house just as much as I did." "Enough," I said, my voice steady. "If you want to fight, do it somewhere else, but in this house, you will show respect." He sneered. "Or what, you'll call the police?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I simply walked to the desk and picked up another document, one he hadn't seen yet. "You seem to forget that I'm your landlord," I said quietly. "As of today, your lease is terminated. You have 30 days to move out of my property." Clara gasped. "Mom, please don't." I looked at her, and though my heart ached, I didn't waver. "You chose to stand beside a man who threatened to have me declared incompetent, a man who looked me in the eye and lied without shame. I won't live my life under the shadow of that anymore." Brian laughed, but the sound was hollow. "You're bluffing." "Try me," I said. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through the air. Brian's laughter stopped. Clara sobbed quietly. For a long time, no one moved. Then, in a voice that barely held together, Clara whispered, "What can we do to make this right?" I thought of Richard's letter, the words I had read over and over like scripture. Use this power not to hurt, but to protect and to teach. "You can start with honesty," I said. "I want a real apology for every lie, every insult, every time you treated me like I was disposable. I want you to look me in the eye and admit what you did." Clara nodded immediately, but Brian bristled. "I'm not going to humiliate myself in front of you," he said. "You've gone senile. This whole story about money and properties, it's a fantasy." That word fantasy hit me harder than any insult he'd ever thrown. I had spent my life building a reality he could only dream of, and yet he called it fiction because it didn't serve him. I walked to the table, where the documents still lay, and one by one, I spread them out. The will, the deeds, the account statements, proof, tangible and undeniable. "Does this look like fantasy to you?" I asked. "Because if it does, you'll have a very difficult time explaining it to your lawyer when he receives the eviction notice tomorrow." Clara reached for one of the papers, her hands shaking. "It's all real," she whispered. "Everything Dad built, everything we thought was gone, it's all hers." Brian's face turned pale. He tried to speak, but no sound came. He turned toward Clara as if searching for a lifeline, but she was no longer standing beside him. For the first time, she looked at him with disgust instead of devotion. "You used me," she said, her voice raw. "You used my fear, my love for my mother, just to get what you wanted." He spun toward her. "Don't start pretending you're innocent." "No," she said, standing taller now. "I'm not innocent, but I'm done being your puppet." I watched the exchange in silence, the tears I hadn't expected welling up behind my eyes. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with fanfare or applause, it arrives quietly, like a breath of clean air after years of suffocating. Brian stared at both of us, his composure unraveling. "You'll regret this," he said. "You can't just erase me." I met his gaze. "Watch me." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him so hard that a picture frame fell from the wall and shattered. Clara covered her face and cried, her shoulders shaking with the force of all she'd been holding in. I stood there for a moment, unsure whether to comfort her or let her grieve alone. Then, gently, I placed a hand on her shoulder. "This doesn't fix everything," I said softly, "but it's a start." She nodded, tears still streaming. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not yet," I said, "but you can earn it." That night, after she left, the house was still. I sat at my desk, looking at the scattered papers that had changed everything. I didn't feel victorious. I felt human, tired, bruised, but finally in control of my own story. And for the first time in a long while, I believed Richard would have been proud. The weeks after Brian's departure passed like the aftermath of a storm, quiet on the surface, but heavy with debris beneath. The silence that filled the house was not the same one I had once cherished. It was deeper, uncertain, a silence that forced me to listen to everything I had avoided for years, my loneliness, my grief, my lingering doubts about whether I had done the right thing. But healing rarely comes with certainty. It arrives slowly, disguised as small acts of courage. One afternoon, 3 weeks after the confrontation, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I saw Clara standing there, her shoulders slumped, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked different, smaller somehow, stripped of the brittle pride she used to wear like armor. In her hands was a grocery bag filled with soup cans, bread, and a jar of honey. She didn't speak at first, only whispered, "Can I come in?" I hesitated. Every part of me wanted to protect what I had just reclaimed, my peace, my dignity, the fragile quiet of the house. But then I saw the faint curve of her stomach, the unmistakable sign of the child she carried. I stepped aside. "You can stay for one night," I said quietly. That night, she barely ate. I watched her from across the table as she picked at the bread, her fingers trembling. Finally, she broke the silence. "He's gone," she said. "Brian left, took the car, the savings, everything. I don't even know where he is." I said nothing. Part of me wanted to say, "I warned you," but another part, the mother in me, couldn't bear to add another wound to her collection. Instead, I poured her tea and listened as she spoke. She confessed how Brian had slowly taken control of everything, her money, her confidence, her thoughts. "I thought he was helping," she whispered. "He said you were old, stubborn, that you'd never understand." And I believed him. I believed him because it was easier than admitting I was scared. Her words broke something open in me. All those months I had thought her cold and unfeeling. She had been living inside a different kind of prison, not one made of walls, but of manipulation. The knowledge didn't erase the pain, but it softened it. Over the next days, she stayed longer than planned. She cooked breakfast once, timidly, like a guest trying not to overstep. She began watering my azaleas, the same flowers Richard had planted years ago. I'd watch her from the porch, sunlight brushing against her hair, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who followed me everywhere, asking questions about everything. We didn't talk much about the past. Forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't need to be loud. It grows in silence, in the way two people share the same space without breaking it. One morning, she came into the kitchen holding Richard's old mug. "Dad always used this one, didn't he?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said. "He said coffee tasted better when it came from something chipped." She smiled faintly. Maybe he was right. As the days passed, she began to open up more. I learned details that made my stomach turn: how Brian had taken loans in her name, how he'd isolated her from her friends, how he'd convinced her that love meant obedience. "He used to say I was nothing without him," she said one night, her voice breaking. And after a while, I started to believe it. I reached across the table and took her hand. "You're not nothing," I said. "You're my daughter, and you're stronger than you think." It was the first time in months that I saw her truly cry, not the polite, restrained kind, but the raw, shattering kind that comes when a person finally lets the truth in. I didn't tell her everything was forgiven. That would have been dishonest. But I told her she was home, and that was enough. Life settled into a gentle rhythm after that. I would wake early, make tea, and find her already in the kitchen, reading or humming softly. Sometimes she'd ask me about Richard, about how we'd met, how we'd managed to stay together through hard years. Other times we just sat in silence, sharing the kind of peace that only exists between two people who have both been broken and are trying to rebuild. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset from the porch, she said, "I keep thinking about that day, the day we came here to take the house. I don't know how you even looked at me afterward." "Because you're my daughter," I said simply, "and because loving you doesn't mean pretending you were right, it means believing you can be better." She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I will be." In the weeks that followed, I saw that promise take shape. She found a part-time job at a local cafe, began saving money, and started attending a support group for women rebuilding their lives. Sometimes she'd bring home a loaf of bread from the bakery next door and say, "I brought this for you. It's not much, but it's a start." And every time I'd smile and tell her, "Everything starts small." At night, after she went to bed, I often sat by the window, the same one I had once stared through in despair, and thought about how strange life could be. I had spent years thinking that my story was ending in loneliness, that all the love I had given had been wasted. But life, in its quiet wisdom, had given it back to me in a different form, not perfect, not painless, but real. Healing, I realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning to live alongside it, to see it not as a wound but as proof that I had survived. Clara and I were learning together, one day at a time, to build something new out of the ruins. And every time I looked at her carrying the child she swore would grow up in a home filled with truth, not fear, I knew that Richard's words had been right all along. Power should never be used to hurt, but to protect and to teach. And that, finally, was what I was doing. The morning of the trial began with the kind of quiet that doesn't belong to peace, it belongs to reckoning. The sky outside my window was pale gray, and the air felt heavy, almost expectant. Clara stood by the kitchen counter, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. Her stomach had grown rounder now, a quiet reminder that life continued, even when everything else felt uncertain. I watched her, remembering the girl she used to be and the woman she was still becoming. "Mom," she whispered, "what if he wins?" I set my own cup down and met her eyes. Truth doesn't lose, Clara. Sometimes it takes time, sometimes it's quiet, but it never loses. We rode to the courthouse in silence. The city moved around us as if unaware of what this day meant. Inside the courtroom, the air was tense, humming with whispers. Brian sat across from us with a lawyer who looked far too polished for the kind of man he was representing. His expression was smug, but his eyes betrayed the sleepless nights that had followed his downfall. The judge entered, and the room fell still. He was older, gray at the temples, his presence calm yet commanding. When he looked up from the file and his eyes met mine, something flickered across his face: recognition, disbelief. "Mrs. Margaret Hale?" he asked slowly. "Yes, Your Honor," I answered, unsure what he meant. He took off his glasses, studying me carefully. "Did you once work for the family court, many years ago?" The room blurred for a moment, the way memories sometimes do when they come flooding back too quickly. "Yes," I said finally. "I was a clerk in Judge Miller's office. That was nearly 30 years ago." A faint smile crossed his face. "You probably don't remember me, but I remember you. You were the one who stayed late helping me file those impossible stacks of papers. You made coffee for everyone and told me to never give up just because people didn't see my worth." It hit me then, David Morales, the shy intern who had stumbled over his words, who everyone else ignored. And now, here he was, wearing the robe of a judge, the same quiet determination in his eyes. The courtroom was utterly silent. Clara turned toward me, astonished. Brian's lawyer shifted uneasily. The judge adjusted his glasses, his voice steady but warm. "Mrs. Hale, I never forgot your kindness. You treated me like I mattered when no one else did. I owe much of my career to the example you set." Brian's lawyer leapt up. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I believe this constitutes a conflict of interest." "There is no conflict," Judge Morales said firmly. "There is only the obligation to do what's right." And then the hearing began. Brian's lawyer spoke first, his words sharp and rehearsed. He painted me as a manipulative mother who had used wealth to destroy her daughter's marriage, a woman obsessed with control. I listened in silence, my hands folded in my lap, my heartbeat steady. For years I had been silenced by fear. Today, I let the truth speak for me. When it was our turn, my lawyer, Miss Rivera, stood and began to reveal what we had prepared. She presented text messages where Brian threatened to leave Clara unless she forced me out of my home. Audio recordings of his late-night shouting, proof of loans he'd taken under her name, and evidence of emotional coercion. Each revelation peeled away the image he'd tried so hard to create. The room grew colder with every document, every photograph, every recorded word. Clara cried quietly beside me, her hand clutching mine under the table. And then, the moment that would decide everything, Miss Rivera handed the judge a sealed envelope. "These," she said, "are letters and statements from neighbors who witnessed the verbal and physical intimidation Mr. Brian Hale directed at both women. There is also a sworn testimony from the building manager confirming that Mrs. Hale is the legal property owner, something Mr. Hale attempted to deny." The judge read in silence for several long minutes. When he finally looked up, his expression was calm but heavy with judgment. "Mr. Hale," he said, "you have spent years manipulating those around you. You have used deceit, intimidation, and emotional abuse to exert power where you had none. The evidence is overwhelming." Brian's face turned pale. "Your Honor, she's turning my wife against me. She's old, confused." The judge's voice cut through the noise. "Enough. I will not allow you to insult this woman further. Mrs. Hale is neither confused nor weak. She is the only person in this courtroom who has shown strength, grace, and integrity." It was over before I realized it. The gavel came down with a final echo that seemed to fill every corner of the room. Custody of Clara's unborn child was awarded solely to her. Brian was ordered to pay damages and was forbidden from contacting either of us. The air seemed to change after that moment. It was as if the weight of years had lifted. Clara turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "Mom," she whispered, "how did he know you?" "Life remembers kindness," I said, "even when we forget it ourselves." Outside the courthouse, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time all morning. Clara hugged me so tightly I could feel her heartbeat against mine, just like when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. "You were right," she said through her tears. "The truth doesn't lose." We stood there on the courthouse steps for a long time, letting the sunlight warm our faces. For years, I had believed that my life was defined by what others took from me: my peace, my home, my sense of worth. But in that moment, I understood that it was also defined by what I had chosen to give: compassion, forgiveness, and the courage to stand for what was right. When we finally walked away, hand in hand, I looked back once at the old courthouse, where a frightened intern had once found encouragement from an older woman who simply believed in decency. I smiled to myself. The world, it seemed, had a quiet way of returning what you give to it. Sometimes it takes decades. Sometimes it takes a lifetime, but it always comes back. That day, as Clara rested her hand on her belly and whispered that her baby would grow up knowing the truth, I realized the fight had never really been about the house, the money, or the betrayal. It was about legacy, the kind you can't steal or forge, the legacy of standing tall when others expect you to fall, the legacy of choosing kindness even when it's the hardest thing to give. And as we walked into the golden afternoon, I knew that justice, once delayed, had finally arrived not just in the courtroom, but in our hearts. 5 years have passed since the trial that changed everything, and sometimes I still wake up before dawn expecting to hear the echoes of those tense courtroom moments, the shuffle of papers, the sharp crack of the gavel, the steady voice of Judge Morales, restoring what I had nearly lost, my dignity. But when I open my eyes now, I no longer see fear or exhaustion reflected back at me. I see peace. The kind of peace that doesn't arrive suddenly, but one that grows slowly, like sunlight creeping across a dark room. The house feels different these days, not because it's larger or brighter, but because it's alive again. Laughter drifts from the kitchen in the mornings where Clara hums while making coffee, her hair tied loosely as she balances a toddler on her hip. Serenity, my granddaughter, fills every corner of this home with curiosity and chaos. Her small voice often echoes through the halls, calling, "Grandma, look," before presenting me with a wildflower, a drawing, or sometimes a ladybug cupped gently in her hands. There is something magical about the way she sees the world untainted, forgiving, full of wonder. Clara has changed too. The bitterness that once clouded her eyes has long been replaced by a quiet strength. She went back to school, studied accounting, and now works for a small firm that values her skills and integrity. Every evening, when she returns home, she looks at me with gratitude. She doesn't always speak aloud, but I see it in her smile, in the way she sets the table for 3 instead of 2, in how she insists that I rest while she finishes the dishes. We've learned how to exist together again, not as a mother and a daughter bound by pain, but as two women who have rebuilt each other from the ruins of betrayal. The day we received the letter from the foundation I had started, Home and Dignity, I felt a wave of quiet pride wash over me. What began as a way to heal my own wounds had become a sanctuary for dozens of other women like me, mothers, grandmothers, widows who had been discarded or deceived by their own families. Some came to us with nothing but a suitcase and a broken spirit. Some carried stories of manipulation, fraud, or neglect. But all of them carried something stronger: the will to survive. We helped them find homes, legal aid, and, more importantly, a sense of belonging. I often tell them, your worth isn't measured by who stays with you, but by what you do when everyone leaves. When the foundation invited us to the inauguration of its third home, a place that would shelter 15 more women, I could hardly hold back tears. Clara insisted on driving, and Serenity sat in the back seat, singing softly to herself. As we arrived, the sight of those women waiting at the gate, smiling, waving, hopeful, felt like watching a field of flowers bloom after years of drought. Each face held a story, each story a victory. That was Richard's legacy too, though he never knew it. His final letter, the one that had once brought me to tears, had guided me through every decision. "Use what I left you not to hurt, but to teach," he had written, and I had done exactly that. Later that evening, as we sat on the porch watching Serenity chase fireflies, Clara turned to me and said, "Mom, do you ever think about him?" She meant Brian. Her voice didn't tremble this time, it was steady, almost reflective. I took a long sip of tea before answering. "No," I said truthfully. "I don't waste time thinking about people who chose destruction when they could have chosen love. I wish him peace, but I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean re-entry." Clara nodded. "I used to blame myself for everything," she said, "but now I know that some people only come into your life to teach you boundaries." I smiled at her, proud of how far she'd come. "And sometimes," I added, "they teach you how strong you really are." The sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke our silence. When I looked up, I saw Judge Morales stepping out with his wife, Elena. He had written to tell me he wanted to visit, but I hadn't expected him so soon. "Mrs. Hale," he greeted warmly. I wanted to deliver this in person. He handed me a folder embossed with gold lettering, the Retired Judges Association Award for Service and Justice. My hands trembled slightly as I read it. "You've turned your pain into purpose," he said. "You remind us that justice isn't confined to the courtroom. It's something we practice every day when we choose to stand up for ourselves and others." His words stayed with me long after they left. That night, after tucking Serenity into bed and listening to her soft breathing, I sat by the window with Richard's chipped mug of tea. Outside, the garden was bathed in moonlight, the same garden where my husband once planted the violets he loved so much. Their purple petals glowed faintly in the darkness, resilient as ever. I thought of the women at the foundation, of the lives being rebuilt, of the quiet ripple one act of defiance can create. Clara joined me, barefoot, holding 2 cups of tea. She sat beside me without speaking for a while, then asked, "Mom, after everything, do you feel happy?" I looked at her, at the daughter who had once betrayed me and then found her way back home, at the granddaughter sleeping peacefully in the next room, at the home that now breathed with love again. "Yes," I said finally. "But not because everything is perfect. Happiness isn't the absence of pain, it's the wisdom that comes from surviving it." We sat in silence after that, letting the night hold us in its calm. Somewhere beyond the garden wall, a train passed in the distance, its whistle faint and lonely. And yet, inside this house, there was nothing lonely left. I had come full circle from loss to discovery, from humiliation to purpose, from silence to voice. As the clock struck midnight, I whispered a quiet prayer of thanks to Richard for his foresight, to the judge for his fairness, to every woman who had taught me resilience, and to the girl I used to be, the one who refused to give up even when her world fell apart. The chipped mug in my hands felt warm, steady, familiar. I smiled to myself and thought, it's never too late to begin again. In the end, my story wasn't about revenge or fortune. It was about reclaiming the right to exist fully, to love, to forgive, to create. The house that had once been a symbol of betrayal had become a home of renewal. The name home and dignity wasn't just for the foundation, it was the truth of my life. Because after everything, that's what I had finally found. Not just peace, but purpose, and the unshakable belief that it's never too late to write a new ending. When I look back on everything that happened, I realize that the story was never truly about losing a house, a daughter, or a sense of safety. It was about rediscovering who I was beneath all the pain. I had spent a lifetime serving others, loving without boundaries, and mistaking silence for peace. It took betrayal, humiliation, and an almost unbearable loneliness for me to finally understand that dignity is not something others can give or take away. It's something you must choose for yourself, every single day. Through every sleepless night, every tear shed in the dark, I learned that power does not come from control or money, but from the quiet decision to keep standing, to keep loving, and to keep believing in your worth, even when others don't. Forgiveness, too, was a lesson I resisted, until I understood that it was never about excusing what had been done. It was about freeing myself from the weight of bitterness. When I forgave, I didn't erase the past. I simply stopped letting it define me. My daughter Clara's journey mirrored my own. She had to face the consequences of her choices and the pain of realizing she had betrayed the very person who loved her most. But in watching her rebuild, I found hope. It reminded me that redemption is always possible when we choose truth over pride and growth over guilt. Seeing her nurture her own child with kindness and strength became my greatest victory, a reminder that love, when guided by wisdom, can heal even the deepest wounds. In time, the foundation we built, home and dignity, became more than a charity. It became a reflection of what I had learned. Each woman who walked through its doors carried her own version of my story. Loss, betrayal, and survival. Helping them rebuild their lives helped me rebuild my own. I realized that healing is not a destination but a daily act of courage, a quiet vow to turn pain into purpose. If there's one truth I carry now, it's this: you are never too old, too broken, or too late to reclaim your life. No matter who has hurt you or how much you've lost, the moment you decide to rise again, you begin to rewrite your story. What once seemed like an ending can become the beginning of something powerful, something that might even inspire others to stand up for themselves too. In life, betrayal and hardship will come from places you least expect, but they are not the end of your story. They are invitations to rediscover your strength. Forgiveness and dignity are choices that liberate the soul. The best revenge is not anger or revenge itself, it's peace, purpose, and self-respect. Apply this today by setting boundaries, honoring your own worth, and turning your scars into wisdom for others. Now I'd love to hear from you. Do you believe that forgiveness truly sets you free, or do you think some betrayals can never be forgiven? Comment A if you believe forgiveness brings peace, or B if you believe some wounds can never fully heal. And if this story touched you, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who might need hope today. Your support means the world. It's what keeps us creating more heartfelt stories like this. Thank you for being part of this journey.